might help if I actually got off of mute and everything, but it is May 1st, or what some people consider the real Labor Day, and all along those lines. But it is definitely May 1st, and folks are out there, some doing celebrations, some not doing celebrations, but definitely kind of like letting folks know how they feel about the labor of the world and all in that space, because definitely this is a day that some people celebrate as May Day and all in that space. And I know that in about another 4 days, there will be another celebration that a lot of people, including a lot in the Latin community, but not just strictly the Latin community, will be celebrating, because in about 4 days, we'll be having Cinco de Mayo. And what I did not realize until I was talking to the son of my neighbor is that that is also another holiday that is coming up as well. And I don't know if my neighbor John knew this or not, but I have neighbors that are from, well, a neighbor, I should say, that's from Ethiopia. And sometimes I'll see the son come by and some of the other relatives. And I've been hearing some and smelling some very good scents. So there's been some serious cooking going on in that space. And what I did not realize is that apparently May 5th, at least this year, is Ethiopian Easter. So Easter, for the folks there in that part of the world, they celebrated on May 5th. And I did not know that until I was talking to the neighbor, and he was like, that's those scents I've been smelling, because there's definitely been some great dishes probably being prepared, as I think they have to get their vegan food together, because I think it's vegan that they have to do during their Passover, and all along those lines. There's definitely been some good scents and some good aromas coming for the last couple of days. So it definitely has been testing in a positive way my smelling faculties and all along those lines. So that's been very interesting observing that fact. And like I said, I did not know until I was talking to that neighbor's son, because he does come by on a pretty regular basis to check on his mom and everything, that was what that particular holiday is coming up on the 5th is. And I stepped outside earlier to grab a bite to eat, went to a place called Smash Burger, was going to go to Firehouse, but their machine was down. So I went to Smash Burger instead. So as soon as I walked into Firehouse, they were like, oh, we're only doing pickup because our machine is down, and therefore we can't take any orders. So I went to the restaurant next door and had a burger and some fries, and it wasn't bad. And I was talking to one of the owners here in Durham, North Carolina, and they were saying that that space has been empty ever since Hook and Reel left. And I think the next door place was a kind of Chinese restaurant or something. I didn't know it was owned by the Chinese, and all in that space. Yeah, it was stir fry, now that I think about it, and all in that kind of way. But they are possibly going to turn that, and maybe the most locations, into a sports bar. They tried that several years ago, and there's not really a sports bar, even though Duke is right here in that particular area. So maybe they'll try that again, and we'll see if it works. But there are a number of other restaurants, so it'll be interesting to see if that plays out or not. But I know when I walked outside, it was because as I commented to one of my other kind of apartment mates, because they're not quite in the same apartment complex, so I can't necessarily call them neighbors in that sense and everything, but it was feeling downright summer-like. So I don't know where it is where John is, but down here it was feeling downright summer-like. I think we've been having temperatures in the 80s and all in that space, so not quite the 90s and not quite the hundreds, but it has also looked like it might rain, so it gets a little bit of that humidity. And of course, there's that dreaded enemy that exists right here in the Carolinas known as pollen. So definitely there's been a lot of pollen going here as well. And a lot of people have been having that pollen paint job. Even though I don't drive, I've seen the pollen paint job on people's cars. I've seen it on people's glasses. I've seen it on a number of other places as well. So yeah, pollen is out there. I'm sure the bees, the butterflies, and the birds are enjoying it, but us humans, maybe not as much so. But as I was telling John, and this is where I know we'll have some commonality, I grew up as a jazz and blues fan. My parents decided to start a jazz radio station in the mid 70s, like right around the independence time, because they were feeling that there was not enough jazz and blues being heard by the commercial radio stations, and that was a form of music that they really appreciated. They also felt that there was not enough minority voices being heard either at that particular time. So with no radio background whatsoever, mom was trained as a guidance counselor, and dad was trained both in the military and as a engineer, but they decided that they would start a radio station, and part of the transmitter was actually on my grandparents' property and all along those lines. So they started it in 1976, and I think it lasted to about 87 or 88. So it was on for about 12 years, and it's where I got part of my media background. But I've had a love of jazz and have some jazz friends, including Nita Freelon, who not that long ago lost her husband, the world famous architect Theo Freelon, but she is a international jazz artist. As a matter of fact, she came to the rescue of a friend of hers because they had been doing, or they just finished a jazz festival at North Carolina Central University, one of our HBCUs, and Jazz Media Horn was supposed to be performing, but for whatever reasons, and I never got clarity as to what happened, and all along those lines, she was not able to perform. And Lenora Helmsley, who runs that part of the program, actually Robert Trower, I think, runs the entire jazz program and everything, but she does work with the vocalists and other things. She reached out to her friend Nina and said, "Hey Nina, I need somebody to step in and do a pinch hitting job." And Nina did that at the Cultural Arts Center that I work at, Hey Ty, and did a great job of it. She is a several time Grammy nominated performer, so I knew that she would. I was not able to make that particular performance. I did see her a day later and everything when she came to pick up some of her music, and I did watch it online and everything, so you could see it online. I don't think it's online right currently, but they'll put it up at a later time and all along those lines. But it was definitely something that she is always doing, and she has her own performance space at North Star Church of the Arts based here in Durham as well. She and her now late husband had done that partially as a way to honor him and his legacy and all in that space, because if I remember correctly, he was passing of Lou Gehrig's disease and all in that kind of way. So definitely she's still out there doing jazz, doing great jazz, and still performing. And she also has a podcast that deals with grief as well. So you're definitely still staying out there and all in that space. But speaking of architects, I'm going to bring in John and see what he's got going on in his life and some of his life lessons learned and all in that space, including being a Grammy Award winning jazz pianist and composer himself, as well as a best-selling author. And I love the title of his book, The Invisible Architect, How to Design Your Perfect Life from Within. And as I told him before on this show, we oftentimes talk about that inner critic and how it can oftentimes kill us and all along those lines. So I'll bring in John and see how you're doing. John, how's everything going? Is the weather as hot where you are as it is here? Because like I said, the last couple of days, there was a few days that we might have needed sweater weather, but you don't need it now, except for maybe in the evening time. So how are you doing, John? And definitely looking forward to hearing about this book.
I'm doing fine, and thank you for inviting me on your show. Really appreciate it. And I'm outside of Nashville here in Franklin, about 20 miles south of Nashville. It's about 84 degrees and no rain. It's sunny and gorgeous, and I can't complain, you know?
Wouldn't do any good to complain anyway. You mentioned being in Nashville. One of the shows that we used to have was, and it may still come back later on, was a young lady from South Africa, but her other place that she used to love going to and that she had part of her musical career was Nashville, and that was Alexandria May. I believe she was a South African idol and all along that line. But I was just wondering, because I do have some friends, including some that have shows here on the network that are sports related, and one that's kind of bully related and everything, that are from either the Nashville or in some cases the Memphis area. But how is the Nashville music scene? Because I know it has always historically been great, both for jazz as well as for, of course, rock and other forms of music as well.
Well, I never thought I'd be here in Nashville. I grew up in Pennsylvania, studied jazz in Boston at Berklee College of Music, and then I lived in California for over 40 years, and never thought I'd be living there. But the last, I don't know, 7, 8 years, California, specifically Los Angeles, I think has become the Titanic in many areas, musically, economically, politically. It's not been doing well. And so my wife, rest her soul, because she passed away about 3.5 years ago, she was instrumental in wanting to get out of LA, even though she originally liked it. And so we ended up moving to Nashville about, 3.5 years ago. And I absolutely love it. To me, it's the new LA. A lot of people think of Nashville, Avoni country, but it's actually a lot of the top jazz and blues guys that I play with in LA and New York have moved here anyway. And it's a real mecca in many areas. But the only thing I miss is being landlocked. So I drive down to Florida every once in a while to visit my daughter, and it's only 10 hours, and fly out to LA occasionally. That's about the only thing I miss,
Yeah, it sounds like that would be the only thing that you miss and everything. Was your wife from the South? Because I do know that sometimes people will want to move to the South because they have Southern roots, or was she like you in the sense that she had no Southern roots but just was attracted to Tennessee for whatever reason she was attracted
Well,
to?
actually, no, we were boyfriend and girlfriend when we were in high school. And then I moved to California eventually. She moved to Virginia. And I was in the music scene, of course, in LA and didn't know what she was up to. But uh, my first wife, I've been married twice, passed away from breast cancer in 1999, 2000. And I hadn't seen my current wife, who just passed away. So I've lost two to the Lord.
Mhm.
Um, she texted me one day and said, "Hey, John, I see you've made quite a name for yourself. One of my daughters found you online. Do you remember me? We were boyfriend and girlfriend way back in high school." And I said, "Yeah, I was thinking about you the other day. What happened to you?" And that started a new relationship. And next thing we know was a breath of fresh air. And she moved out here and we got married and had 20 beautiful years together. But as Los Angeles started to crash and burn, uh, she motivated me to want to move. And at that point, uh, I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania, didn't really want to go back there. There was nothing there. She had kids in Virginia and a kid in Florida, and those two areas didn't interest me at all. But my partner, Billy Sheehan, that's part of my band Niacin, he had moved to Brentwood right outside of Nashville, and he kept telling me how incredible it was here. So I said, "Hey, honey, what about Nashville? Because even though I'm quasi retired musically, I still do a few projects here and there." I said, "At least we'll be in the area of music." And as far as I can know, other than an occasional tornado we have to dodge, I think it's going to be a pretty cool place. And that's how we got here.
It sounds like it. Sounds like an amazing story as to how you got there and everything. You mentioned that that first wife had passed away of breast cancer, and I've definitely had friends that are in remission from breast cancer, and others that have definitely dealt with that battle as well. So, what advice would you give to guys that are facing their spouse being one with breast cancer, and it is not just strictly a women disease? Because I do know that there are men that get breast cancer as well, even though we are oftentimes told to check our prostates and other part of the male anatomy. But what advice would you give to folks that are facing that cancer battle and everything?
Well, doesn't matter what disease it is, obviously. Cancer is one of several, like you just sort of mentioned. Um, in my book, I discuss uh, connection with the invisible architect, which is my name for God, or the universal energy, or the quantum intelligent energy field that made us all and has uh, permeates the world and the universe. I would say step one would be to make sure, if you haven't, to get really hooked up with your roots, because the kingdom of the Lord is within us. And I'm not speaking religiously as much as energy. And so when you're fighting anything, you want all the power you can, because you're going to have to make lots of decisions. So information, research, and power, uh, no better power than being hooked up to that energy source that created everything. So getting hooked up to that energy source is extremely important when you're dealing with trying to master and get your health together. So that's the first step. And then the second step is regarding cancer. I'd say don't be limited in your viewpoint. Not only should you check out traditional medicine as they apply appropriately, but definitely check out other modalities of alternative healing that may be appropriate for your particular situation. This way, you have a better fighting chance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Everything you mentioned that being a musician, and like I said, I've got a great deal of respect for musicians. As a matter of fact, a good friend of mine last week, and I should have followed up this past weekend and everything, but I'll probably get with him this week. Has said that he would love to have his book written, his life story written, and all along those lines. And I would probably do some ghostwriting for him. That being Stanley Baird, who has had some roots in Asheville. I think he even taught in my hometown of Warrenton, and has definitely been a fixture here in the Raleigh-Durham area, what we call the Research Triangle Park, and all along those lines. But I'm sure one of the things we'll be talking about in that book is how he became a musician and why he became a musician. And that's what I'm going to ask you is what got you into this musical field? And then I'm going to ask you after that about labels, and particularly labels with music. But how did you get started as a musician?
Well, believe it or not, at 3 years old, my parents had got their first TV. I was sitting in the living room between my mom and dad, and I saw an accordion being played on a TV show, and the little voice in my head, which I discuss in my book, The Invisible Architect, that was the first time I became aware of this inner voice. I didn't know what it was at 3 years old. And the voice said, yes, point to that accordion. So at 3 years old, sitting on the floor, I pointed to the accordion. And my mom kind of looked at my dad and said, I wonder why he's doing that. Well, maybe he wants to play the accordion, right? Mm-hmm. And anyway, a few years later, that's what happened. I grew up in an Italian Catholic family and started taking accordion lessons. In a few years, became really good at accordion, but realized that I didn't want to play accordion. I just saw the keyboard. I was pointing to the keyboard. And that led me to the piano because my sister got a piano. So I've been blessed, as I discuss in my book, with this connection to this higher self, which I eventually called the Invisible Architect, that would always advise and counsel me. And we all have that voice, but most of us are too distracted to pay attention. And you have to be at that frequency, just like a radio station has to be tuned to a certain frequency in order to receive the broadcast. If you're busy doing other things, you're not paying attention, you're not going to be aware of this inner or higher self or voice. So eventually, it told me to play the piano, and I booted my sister off the piano, started practicing the piano, and then switched over from the accordion to the piano. And eventually, that was the era of bands. And I met a friend who was a singer in a band, and I had started seeing bands on TV, and I thought, well, geez, I play piano. What if I can be in a band? So in other words, in hindsight, I feel like I've been blessed with some talent, and A, and B, been guided because I paid attention. And then I got in a band, and within 3 years, we ended up with a record deal. I grew up in Erie, Pennsylvania. Some famous record producer was traveling from New York City to Cleveland, where he lived, had to pass through Erie on Route 90, and there was a snowstorm. And you can't make this up, so I feel this was very orchestrated from above. He had to pull off the freeway, get a room at the Ramada Inn, and my band just happened to be playing that night. He came into the lobby, saw the band, walked up and said, I'm really impressed. You don't know me probably. My name is such and such, but I'm a record producer, and I happen to be snowbound here. And luckily I came in, and I really like your band. Are you guys signed? We didn't even know what that meant. Signed. What the hell is signed, right? Found out later he meant to a record deal. He was a top producer. And there was a band, which shows you I'm giving away my age, back in the time that was famous. They had a hit record out called Time Won't Let Me by the Outsiders. It was a very big record. He was the producer. So 3 weeks later, we got a record deal offer on MGM Records through his small independent label in Cleveland. And I got a taste of the music scene. And then we ended up releasing the single. In those days, they released a single, a 45. Right. And it went number 3 in the East Coast. And next thing you know, we've got a hit record on our hands, and we're about ready to go up to Cleveland to finish the record. That's what they did. They released a single, and if it did good, then they put more money into you. But those were the days of the draft and the Vietnam War and all that stuff. And our lead singer got drafted. And that was the end of the record deal. As soon as they found that out, the rest was history. And I was bummed and didn't know what to do because this was so easy. 1 minute I'm taking lessons. Next minute I'm getting asked to be in a band. I put the band together. I study. Next thing we got a record deal. Next thing we got a hit record. And the next thing the Lord takes our singer, and I'm like scratch my head going, what the hell just happened? And eventually I decided, because of that experience, and now I also know that the Lord works in mysterious ways and orchestrates things, attention for our benefit. And that motivated me to want to be trained and really know my stuff. So I researched and found out that Berklee College of Music was the best music school in Boston. Went there to study jazz, met a bunch of people, and decided to go out west and move out to Los Angeles. And did really well. That's how the whole thing started.
Well, you brought up a couple of interesting points. One is, as I think I mentioned to you when I reached out to you, one of the things we oftentimes talk about is that inner critic, and definitely people have various names for it, including the imposter syndrome and a number of other things. So I was just wondering, even as a young man, how did you get the conviction to actually hear the voice and to honor the voice? Because I do think that a number of times people will have, and I know I've been guilty of it, that whole conversation, whether there is business opportunities, and I have even seen that in my romantic life as well, because I have not had the pleasure. My brother's been married twice, but I've not been married at all and everything. But I do know that there have been times that I've had that whole conversation when wanting to pursue somebody, a young lady and everything, and have talked myself out of it. And by the time I talked myself into it, that lady and that opportunity had left. So I just wondered, how have you dealt with that inner critic that we all face, or like I said, some people call it the imposter syndrome?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I like the word critic, because I don't think it's a critic. I think it's a powerful energy source that has created all and is there to help us. But when we incarnate into a lifetime, life is for lessons, and the lessons come from good things that happen to us. The lessons come from bad things that happen to us, and we have to pay attention. And don't know why, this is above my pay grade at 3 years old, why I listened to that higher self, let's call it at that point, higher self or inner voice. I don't know why I so readily heard it, but I heard it as clear as you and I are talking. It literally was like, hey, John, point to that accordion. And at 3 years old, how much do you know? All I did was follow instructions. And, the rest was history. In my book, I discuss how myself and this invisible architect, which I eventually called it, became buddies and pals. And I always felt like I had this bodyguard and this resource, this energy source as a friend. And so whether I needed consultation, advice, trying to make a decision, or whether I was playing the piano and I needed to play better, for some reason, it was always there at the age of 3, and it still has been there. Now, I've talked to many people because I do one-on-one mentoring based off the fundamentals of my book, and I help people, A, discover this inner power, kingdom of God is within, B, discover how to connect and interact with it correctly, because what you were discussing about is the interaction. A lot of us are so busy in the goings on in life and surviving, and that this voice is giving us advice all the time, but we're so busy that we're almost not paying attention to it. So you have to learn how to get to that frequency. So it's like channel is always tuned in, so you can get that advice and counsel and that power source. A good example would be like in World War I or II, they used to have something called the front lines. One side is the enemy and the other side is you. And then you have command back. Well, if you're at the front lines and all of a sudden the enemy's 5,000 people coming over the hill, and you didn't know you had air support and tanks and the command center to help you, you'd be out there just with your little brigade trying to fight the whole damn enemy. When in fact, if you knew you had command central and you knew you had air support, you could get on your walkie-talkie and radio for help and probably wipe out and win. That's sort of the case. We all have this invisible architect. In physics, I call it quantum intelligent energy field. The reason why I do that is because I don't like to be hooked up to any organized religions and beliefs. When I talk to people, I don't like to have those things get in the way. So when I mentor people, I do it on a more neutral basis. So this way, if somebody's a Buddhist or a Hindu or an atheist or a Christian or whatever, they can still study the fundamentals that are in my award-winning book. So make a long story short, that voice was always hooked up to me. So I consider myself blessed, and I pat myself on the back for recognizing it. And now I'm sort of paying it forward, many, many, many years later, and all of my success is from this power. And so I wouldn't be a very good person if I didn't want to share. So that's what motivated me to write The Invisible Architect, How to Design Your Perfect Life Within. So that book is a combination of an autobiography on how I got hooked up, how I used it, and how I can help other people hook up and use that.
Makes sense? As a coach, that makes a lot of sense. But as a coach, how do you get people from making that mistake? And I know that I've done it. I'll use the example of relationships, but it's not just relationships, it's also in business. Because one of the things that I hear people complain about, and I know that I've been guilty of it as well, is that sometimes you find yourself falling for the same trap over and over. So you find yourself making the same mistake over and over. It might be the same type of a woman. I'll just use that as an example that you know is not good for you, but you keep falling for that particular type and everything. So how do you get people to get out of that trap of making the same mistakes over and over? Because that is, I know that they said that that's the definition of insanity, is to do the same thing over and over again. But I do find that a lot of people are falling into that trap of doing that same thing and not learning the lessons that God or the architects you're calling them are probably trying to teach us.
Good question. So in my book, I'm going to give away a little nugget here. There's a concept of creation and manifestation that I call the be plus do. Man, don't know why I'm sneezing. Be plus do equal have. Mm-hmm. Most people have it backwards. Most humans, I'm not trying to speak like I'm an extraterrestrial, but most humans have it backwards. They are focused on have. Well, if I had this, I'd be able to do this, and then I could become that guy that she wants. Or if I had this connection, I'd be able to have a breakthrough. Or if I had this much money, I could get in other words, it's backwards. People who are successful, whether they studied this concept or whether it's natural, they operate on be, do, have. In other words, and I'm getting to your answer, be is what you are envisioning, what your desire is, what your goal is. So let's say, applied to relationships, you have a be, a desire, a strategy, a goal to have a wonderful, mutual, satisfying, loving relationship. That's your goal, right?
Right.
Well, that's be. Now, a goal is fine. It's better than no goal. But a goal is also not good, because a goal is already admitting that you currently do not have it, right? Means that you are thinking about in the future, wouldn't it be fantastic if I found a great lady and she loved me and everything was hunky-dory? So you're admitting you don't have that now. So that means you don't have a be set up. So you want to change a goal and get rid of time and imagine the goal already realized in your mind, because in your mind, you can do anything. Whereas in the manifest or physical universe, there's work to be done in order for it to manifest. So in order for it to manifest in the physical universe, you have to have a very clear, clean, precise, imaginary envision of what your goal is, whether it's to be wealthy, whether it's to be the CEO of a company, to be an inventor, a jazz musician, or just a loving husband with a great relationship and family. Whatever that is, you want to change the goal to a goal already achieved. Now, here's where the problem comes in. The moment you imagine it already achieved, what does the mind do? It goes, yeah, nice try, Mark, but you've already had two bad ones. And the chances are you're probably going to attract another one. And I don't know why you're in denial, but blah, 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 blah. And then the goal sits on the back burner, or you end up attracting another, like you said. Right. Whereas that means your B is incorrect. You need to change that goal into a correct desire, which you have to imagine that you already have this family, already have this incredible lady in relationship, and have faith that it will happen in the physical universe, but not be concerned if it does, because the architect, for some reason, and whether you want to call it God or your higher self or your inner critic, doesn't really matter what your name is, whatever your beliefs are, it will get busy orchestrating all the things that need to occur for you to attract that ideal relationship. That's why the book is called Invisible Architect, How to Design Your Perfect Life from Within. The book is not called How to Design Your Perfect Life from Within. That means you are doing everything. That means you're in the front lines during the war and you're not calling command center with your walkie-talkie. You are out there with your bazooka and your M1 and you're trying to fight the enemy all by yourself, which is stupid. Ain't going to work. So the architect can architect anything. Everything is possible with the architect, but God gave us free will.
Mhm.
And he does not interfere with free will. So you have to A, be aware of him, B, invite him into your life, and C, know how to interact with him, which is what my book and mentoring is all about. So some people read the book and make progress, but I've found out that without an accountable one-on-one expert mentor, they have difficulty. And Napoleon Hill said many, many times, the author of Think and Grow Rich,
Right.
that we should have a mentor. So I act as a one-on-one mentor who's already working with the architect successfully and wrote a whole book about how to work with and interact. So when people work with me, I meet with them, I find out all the things in their life, because people usually don't just have one unachieved goal. They have several, an overall one and many of them. And I find out all the unachieved goals, which means in the be do have, you have a bunch of haves that aren't ideal. That means you have some bees that need to be worked on. So I have you list all those. I show you the fundamentals of how to hook up and interact with the architect. I know it seems a little woo-woo, but it isn't. And once you get the hang of interacting with and working, you can get out of that catch-22 of manifesting the same thing over and over and over again and jump out of this mediocrity or mediocre life. Sort of like the movie Bill Murray, Groundhog Day. Remember that movie?
I do remember that movie. Yeah.
Well, he got blessed because he was a narcissistic guy and wasn't really going anywhere, and people hated him. And so the Lord blessed him by stopping his life, and every time in the morning, he lived it over again. So eventually he's getting upset, but he started to realize something day by day by day, and he got better and better. And finally, when he and the Lord realized he had become a better guy through the trials and tribulations of reliving the day over and over again. Some people say that's very similar to what reincarnation is, whether they believe it or not. He then got to go on to the next thing, and he was a different guy. So rather than have to go through all that turmoil and effort, I show people how to speed up this whole thing through the fundamentals of my book and having a one-on-one mentor.
That makes a whole lot of sense. Everything you brought up reincarnation, and I know that you're also a believer in past lives, and I'm a big believer in being connected to the ancestors. I know that I still hear and feel that my grandmother, as well as certain friends that have gone into the ancestral grounds, are still guiding my path even to this day and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts as to why you believe in a reincarnation, and do you think that you have a strong connection to your ancestors? I think I heard you say that you are of Italian background, and I do know that the Italian culture has a ancestral tie, just like it has some ties to certain stereotypes as well. But I'm just wondering, how important is that ancestral background to your own life and everything?
Well, it is, but to back up on the lifetimes, I grew up in a very stiff, organized religion. I don't like to get into discussing religions, but at about 10th or 11th grade, and remember now, I've already been interacting with this inner voice since 3 years old. Some of the things that I was being taught were not working for me logically. I've always had a bit of a philosophical, logical mind. Things have to make sense for me in order to operate. So when I started getting this stuff force fed that didn't make sense, especially the concept of God is all loving, but if you screw up, he's going to throw you into a place called hell forever. I couldn't get my mind past that. I kept, wait a minute, all loving, blah. If I had a child and she or he screwed up would I just throw them in a prison and beat them up and suffer for the rest of their life? Or if I love them, would I want to help them? And the answer, of course, was the latter. So I always thought that was false information. So that modality of that didn't work. And then one day I just happened to, in the library, see something called Past Lives, which I had never I never even ran across. I was in 11th or 12th grade. And I read the book. Being a prolific reader, I started reading. And all of a sudden, everything started locking into place because I was studying music. And I used to always ask God, why did you give Mozart and Beethoven and Bach and Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock all these brains and concepts and talent? And you gave some to me, but it doesn't seem like you gave as much to me as them. Well, what did I do wrong? How did I fall out of favor? It didn't work. It seemed like that doesn't make sense either. But then I'm reading Past Lives, and I'm reading a book about past life abilities can sometimes come through in another lifetime. In other words, the amnesia that we all are born with sometimes wears off. And then one day the light bulb hit me and I went, oh, Mozart wrote a sonata at 7 years old because his past life efforts and talent somehow came through in his new body, in his mind, and he started using it. So people didn't know what to call it. All they would say is, he's talented. He's a prodigy. He's this. He's that, where this guy doesn't have that talent. That seemed to make more sense, which led me on that little crusade and little research, and it started to all line up, especially later on in life when I did a couple past life regressions with some very expert people, and then I had a couple out-of-body experiences that just happened, and realized that I indeed was an eternal spirit, and that this lifetime was for lessons to be learned. And if I paid attention, things could be incredible. So it all started to make sense to me. And I have firsthand empirical evidence that is true. So it's not a belief for me anymore. It's actual knowingness. And the same thing with the Italian thing. Yeah, the Italian family has deep ties with each other. As bad as the mafia is, the good thing about it is they were really hooked up and took care of each other. That's the bad part of it. But the good part of it is Italians really like family. And I've always had that family support in my life, and ancestors, not only this lifetime, but from the past. So I think I've been blessed in that area. But at the same time, I paid attention and did my own homework.
And that makes a lot of sense. One thing I was curious about, and you kind of alluded to it earlier and everything, is a lot of times people are frustrated by whatever their great disappointment is and everything. But I think you can also learn from those disappointments as well. Because I do know that even one of the events that I've been involved with is called the Road to the Apollo. A friend of mine does it as a veteran advocacy kind of tool, and he takes winners up to the real Apollo and they get to jump the line, and we've had some success. But one of the things I know about the Apollo is that there have been people before they change some of their rules, because they don't try not to boo the kids, because they would like to encourage the kids and not have their kind of morale destroyed. And that's a rule that we have passed on as well and everything, so they don't do as much of the booing, I think, for the kids as they used to do. But if you follow the Apollo and even some of the American Idols and other contests, you will know that sometimes some of the greatest successes were actually not met with the greatest approval. I think Roberta Flack and maybe even Stevie Wonder did not do all that great their first couple of times. I don't remember all of them, but I know a couple of them that went on to worldwide fame and success, but they were not met with tremendous warm welcome in some of these contests or in some of these venues that are supposed to be stomping ground for musicians. So I was just wondering, what was a big letdown in your life musically, and how did you use that disappointment to give success in the music business?
Well, I actually not only alluded, but my original story of the producer that discovered my band and offered me a record deal, that was so easy. I just thought life was easy. Okay. I got in a band, started learning how to compose and arrange music, put the band together, started playing, became really good in the area, got discovered, got a record deal, had a hit record. Wow, this is fine. And then the rug was pulled out from under me. Now, I can look at that from a victim point of view,
Mm-hmm.
or I can look at that as God sending me a difficulty as like fate, as a test of my faith, and to strengthen me for what He has planned, what the invisible architect has planned in the future. There's an incredible, one of the only pastors that I really like, he passed away recently, called Dr. Charles Stanley. He was an amazing pastor, and he has a tape that can go online called Why God Gives Us or Sends Us Difficulties. So that difficulty could have been a sink or swim situation for me. I could have went, well, I guess I'm not into music. I guess I should get a job and stay in Erie, Pennsylvania, like all the other people do, and make a living. But no, I immediately, after I recovered 2 or 3 weeks, I went, you know what? I think I'm supposed to be more than just a pop rock musician. And I started finding out about jazz through my teacher. Then I started to research, and then I found out the best college of music was in Boston, at Berklee College of Music. And I just graduated college with equivalency of a master's in mathematics. I didn't go on to write my thesis. So here I am, complete music failure because of what just happened. A sort of a quasi degree in mathematics, already had my BS. What am I going to do? I told my parents I'm going back to college, and they thought, well, we're not going to pay for that. We already helped you. You're on your own, dude. And went to Boston, studied, became much better and more trained, went out to California, and now I had the wherewithal and the chops to be competitive, and got signed to a couple more record deals and ended up working with Donna Summer and Manhattan Transfer and all these people, and my career started. Now, would that have happened had I not had a failure? If that would have been a hit record and then a hit album, and I probably would have made some money, God knows, maybe I would have got into the 60s drug culture. I don't know. But the point is, it ended up motivating me to become more trained and competitive. And then I went into the music industry way more prepared. So I looked at that, even though I didn't intentionally and consciously know that that failure was meant to be a motivational impetus for me to learn more. But I luckily chose the right thing rather than become a victim. And even though it took me, that was like I was 20 years old. By the time I got done studying and experiencing life, I didn't move out to California till I was 30. So I was a late bloomer in the music biz. Here I am, 30, 31, getting started, where all the prodigies and all the people that I looked up to, between 7 and 8 and 9, they were already, Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock, they were already smoking. So here I am, 30, but time didn't mess me up. I just kept after my goal, and I highly recommend an inspirational movie that I just seen and I never seen before. True story of a lady named Nyad, N-Y-A-D, 63 years old, and she decided she was a marathon swimmer that was a failure. She decided she's going to jump back in as a marathon swimmer at 63 and swim from Cuba to Florida Keys. That's almost impossible to do if you're in shape, let alone 63 years old. And that's a true story of how she decided to pick herself up by the bootstraps and confront her unachieved goal. That's her B. And then she started training and everything in order she could have her win. And it's so inspirational that I recommend it to anybody. And another inspirational movie is Secretariat, the horse that won the Triple Crown. Because we all need inspiration. Now, how does that work with me? Well, what I do, whether you have an inspirational movie, I end up being the mentor, and me plus your desire, plus, and here's the key, the invisible architect can achieve anything. And so when people work with me, they work with me, my book, this is my book, I'm just going to plug it for a minute, Invisible Architect. They read my book. I go through all the chapters with them, all the fundamentals, and I teach them how they can apply these fundamentals to any of their goals. And therefore, you can actually sort of rehabilitate failures, because your question was specifically about what happens when you really run into a major failure. Well,
Right.
first of all, you got to recover from it. But if you don't have anything to recover to, you could drift into that depression state for a long time. Whereas if you know there is a methodology that you can do, then you can out-create that. You can be causative and not be a victim.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of not being a victim, there are folks on the network sometimes, meaning the Pod TV network, that will say that the music careers or music degrees are not worth anything because definitely they are kind of seen as frivolous. It's not something that I agree with, because I'm a big supporter of creative arts, and I'm a big supporter of the arts, even teaching critical thinking. But for those people that are thinking that liberal degrees or that are degrees in the arts are not worthwhile, what would your answer be to those folks? So that do know
Well,
that there are some folks
it's a double-edged sword. In general, street learning, and talking about specifically the music biz,
Mhm.
is a better way to go, because you are starting out right away learning from people that are already doing what you want to do. So you call them miniature mentors and a mentor. And you're saving a lot of time and money, because if you want to learn how to climb mountains, wouldn't it be better to wake up every day and start climbing mountains with some experts and learn directly, rather than go to school and look at a bunch of pictures and essays and take tests and study all kinds of rock formations and everything? And then when you graduate, okay, now I'm going to climb a mountain. Well, for 4 years, you could have been climbing. So that's the bad side of education. And the good side is, depending on your career and your teachers, there are certain types of education that can further it, as long as you don't get stuck in one or the other. So I studied mathematics. On one hand, I could look back and say, well, that was a waste of time. I should have went to music school or just start. Well, wait a minute. I learned a lot in mathematics that are applicable to synthesizers and programming and all kinds of things. So you have to be able to know when to jump off this educational boat and start swimming towards the shore. So I didn't go to Berklee College of Music to go to school all over again. All I did was find the greatest teachers there and study from them. In other words, the meat and potatoes. And then I got involved in the industry, playing in bands and clubs and learning through the School of Hard Knocks. So I think there's no one answer. No, you should only get a degree and then you should do this, or no, you should avoid college. I will say that if you're going to be an attorney in those kinds of gigs, or a doctor, you almost have to go to school and get the degree and go to postgraduate school and whatever. But if you're going to be in the creative arts or things like that, you may have to think it through and decide how much education is important for me compared to the experience world of education, and balance them.
And that makes a lot of sense. I can see that being a situation, everything. I alluded to it earlier, but I would definitely want to hear your thoughts. I know that there was a famous jazz musician, I can't remember whether it was Thelonious Monk or John Coltrane, that really hated this notion of labels. They just like the idea of good music and all in that space. So you definitely have said a couple of times that you see yourself as a jazz musician, but you are in an area that has an active country scene and an active blues scene. But I was just wondering, how important do you think it is to be labeled in one form or another, or you like that artist? And like I said, I wish I could remember who it was. I know it was a famous one, might have even been Miles Davis.
Miles Davis was Miles.
Okay.
Yeah, I again, double answer. Labels are only good for one thing, and that's marketing.
Mm-hmm.
When you market, meaning trying to sell anything, you have to have a clear message of what you're marketing, or people don't know how to make a decision to buy it or not. So from a marketing point of view, yeah, you're not going to have your agent book you in a country western hall if you're playing Thelonious Monk, Chick Corea, jazz fusion. They're probably going to get beer cans thrown at you because you're doing something that they don't understand or they don't like. You want to play for the correct audience. Now, if you're so good that you can be versatile enough to communicate across many markets, then of course, then you're going to be more and more successful. But if you're more of a niche type artist, you want to do that. So labels, for the necessary evil of marketing, usually try to pigeonhole an artist. Every once in a while, they get an artist they can't pigeonhole, like Prince.
Mm-hmm.
Got signed to Warner Brothers. When he first got signed, he was opening up agents because he was so incredible for the Stones. And the Rolling Stones were huge, more pop rock, white artists.
Right.
And there's this black artist playing rock, and they only wanted to hear the Stones, so they were booing him and everything. So when he got signed to Warner Brothers, he was one of the few artists that commanded this because of his brilliance. He said, I'm going to produce myself. No, no. And I'm also going to do the music I want. Well, no, you're black and need to do R&B. He said, screw you. So you have to know how to break through this marketing concept and this label stuff and find your own melody. Chick Corea had a book out. We were good friends, and he called every artist has to find their own melody.
Mm.
Everybody, even a mechanic. I'm sure you've went to and had good mechanics and bad mechanics, and you get a good mechanic and you can see that he loves working on cars. He treats you great. He's brilliant. And then some other mechanics, it's just a job and you don't like the guy. You're never going to go back to him. That means he's found his melody, his calling, his passion. He loves it. As an artist, it's extremely important because for some reason, when you go out on stage, when you perform, the audience doesn't know, but they feel and perceive, wow, this guy's really into it. This guy's in the zone. This guy, I got it. Oh, wow. They don't know what it is. That's because they have found their melody and they are communicating it effortlessly. They're on their purpose, as compared to a record company saying, you should do this and you should do that and you should do this. So my answer to labels are, in the end, an artist doesn't want to be pigeonholed and move towards being labeled. But at the same time, if you haven't found your melody, it's going to be hard to market you. So there used to be a department in all record labels called A&R.
Mm-hmm.
A&R was supposed to help you find your label if you didn't know it. Nowadays, A&R departments seem non-existent, and an artist has to find their own niche, and then the label goes, oh, look at that guy and look at the people standing, oh, he's really found it, we want to sign him. Because everybody's so concerned about money and losses, they don't want to risk and develop things anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. One thing that I was curious about, we do have one of the other guests. I did say we might get another one that pops in and everything. I'm going to bring him on because he's in the creator space as well. And I did have one of your videos that I wanted to play also, and maybe even a couple of them and everything. But what do you say? Because one of the reasons the network was founded is of this notion of fiscal literacy and the fact that we're not teaching enough about financial wherewithal and everything in that space. And there are times people will remember that it is called show business for a reason. And sometimes people get the business aspect of show business and not really have a knowledge of like a business plan for their band or a kind of way to address even how they will be paid and a number of other things. So how important was it for you to learn the business of show business? And do you feel that you have still mastered that? Or is that something that even at this age, you are still learning on a regular basis? How important has it been for you to have that financial knowledge?
Financial knowledge is important, but I actually think it's got to be learned almost the hard way. And then at a certain point, you have to delegate it. In order to delegate it, you have to have trust in the people you're working with. Because look at Billy Joel. I think his cousin or somebody, he delegated it and ended up ripping him off. So you have to have enough knowledge of finance, I think, and business, and the concept of hats. Like, we all have different hats to wear. Not everybody can be the jack of all trades. So I have a manager that handles the business for me. And of course, I have an agent that books me. And that's called division of labor, because doing it myself would spread me too thin and wouldn't have enough time to be creative. But in the early days of my life, yeah, I was everybody, man. I called up the gig and say, hey, I got a band and I'd like to play at your place. Send me a demo. Okay, drove up, got a demo. Hey, did you listen to my demo? No. So I had to learn persistence. I had to learn wearing all the hats and learn getting paid. So I learned all that through the School of Hard Knocks. And then as I started becoming more and more successful, I started realizing I need to delegate those hats. But even then, I remember my first record deal. I mean, my second record deal that I got after the first one. Um, I found an agent to represent me, and he ended up screwing me, and I lost $5,000 that I didn't have. So I had to learn that, and I realized the lesson that I learned there was I wanted it so bad that I ignored all the red flags. So that was a way for me to learn that yes, you want this, but at the same time, you need to be a little bit more knowledgeable. So I think it's good when people go to college and they take some courses about the record industry and what a royalty is and how to get paid. But I think they actually have to pay attention and learn a lot through the School of Hard Knocks as they're coming up.
Man, it makes a lot of sense. You definitely got to learn that School of Hard Knocks. Because of School of Hard Knocks, I'm going to bring up Christopher. Hopefully he's with us as well because he comes out of the world of entertainment also. But definitely, Christopher, you've been hearing some of the conversation. And like I said, I'm going to bring up some of John's music in a little bit as well. But Christopher, share a little bit about what you've got going on because I know that you are in the creative world as well.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Yes, I'm a writer, a storyteller, Wall Street Journal bestseller, and the School of Hard Knocks is sometimes the absolutely best place to learn. As Walt Disney said, sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is a good, swift kick in the teeth.
Yep.
And so I look and try to see where I come from, how I can use my experiences, and a lot of my experiences I can personally put into my writing. Right. So for me, that's absolutely a fabulous thing to share. And I frequently share with other writers coming up, and you learn so much from mistakes. A lot of times people don't learn from their successes, but the mistakes are where you really get it.
Agreed.
And how much, because one thing that I was talking to John about, and he calls his book The Inner Architect, and I definitely want to hear about your various books as well, Christopher, but he talked about that inner architect, which is kind of like that force from above, or that voice from above is what many people call it. Some people call it a God voice, or a number of others, because he was even saying that at the young age of 3, I believe it was, he heard a voice that was telling him to play a certain instrument, and he's gotten into music even at that young age. So he was hearing that voice at a young age. So at what point did you hear the voice, whether you want to call it God, or some people might just call it the spirit voice, or if you're of the Native American background and everything, it has various labels and everything. But what time did you actually get in tune with what the universe was trying to tell you to do, Christopher?
Oh, I give all the credit to God. I'll sing praises from the rooftops, and again, it's just where for me, my father died when I was a month old. My mom had 6 kids. She took care of my World War I grandfather. You never met a tougher woman. I remember coming home and, the table would be gone. I'm like, what happened to the table? And they'd be like, oh, we had to sell it. I'm like, oh, okay. It created a lot of anger issues, a lot of other things. And I got into drugs pretty early in my life. And then I quit them. And I went into theater and absolutely loved theater. I loved acting. I was going to be a dancer, and I blew my knee out. And what I didn't realize when my dancing career was over, on my downtime, I wrote a book. And it really was my calling. I really felt that this is what God wanted me to do with my life. And I listened to everybody else. And that's when you talk about like the mistakes that you make. That was the mistake I made. Is everybody said, you'll never be an author. And I listened to it. And even though, that was back in the days where dinosaurs roamed the earth. So it was all brick and mortar publishing. And I sent off the manuscript, and one publisher, they said they loved it, but it wasn't right for them. So they asked if they could send it off to another publisher. They did. And then by that time, and one thing I didn't realize is I got addicted to the painkillers from my knee operation. Mm-hmm. And it was something I didn't actually realize what happened until I was writing a book on that. And my book, The Girl Who Lived, which hit #1 on Amazon, that book, in it, the main character had a similar problem, and I wrote it, and I realized that's what happened to me. And I went through 5 drug rehabs. I hit complete rock bottom, and really changed my life. And went, I really want to go not this way. And my wife had written a book, and she asked me, "Can you help me get this published? Because now you have this whole independent publishing thing." And I didn't want to mess up her book, because that's the last thing you want to do to an artist, is mess up their work. So I said, you know what? I'll write it again. And I realized how much I just love writing. And again, that it can be used to help people in ways that I never really understood. But like in the whole writing process, I've seen nothing but actually just God working. And you could see it in the cover of my book. I wish I brought one on there. I don't know if you ever do an overlay, but like on the cover of the book, my book actually got on like the Seth Meyers show, the Late Show, with the cover. And that's I'll tell you that story real quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was working on, they're working on making a movie out of The Girl Who Lived. So I wrote the screenplay, and my agent was going to meet with Netflix, and they said, "Has the book ever been in the news?" And I said, "It won 6 awards, but what books are in the news besides Harry Potter?" And they said, "Well, it would be great if it was in the news." I'm like, "Well, it's not." And I said, "You know what? I'm going to pray about it, and but there's nothing I can do. I'm praying about the meeting." And 15 minutes later, my nephew, who was in the Peace Corps, who was in, I think, Argentina, an airport. He's a handsome Italian kid. He went up to this blonde girl who was reading, and he said, "Hi, what are you reading?" And she said, "I'm reading The Girl Who Lived." And he's like, "No way, my uncle wrote that." And she rolled her eyes and thought it was a big come on. And he's like, no, he wrote that. And he's like, "How did you find it?" She goes, "It was on the the Late Show with Seth Meyers." So he sends me a picture. I think he's punking me. And I go and I look it up, and then I send it off to my agent, who's meeting with the guy from Netflix. And he said, "How is this possible?" And I'm like, "God." So there are, just many things that work out that way, I think, as far as the writing goes. And in that particular book too, I see that a lot. Like one of the main characters has a disease called Farby disease, and it's inherited, and it's built into the mystery because there are certain things that are passed down that are clues to the mystery. And a number of people have written to me and said, "I've taken your book to my doctor and said, this is what I had." And they had Farby disease. And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm not a doctor. I'm an author. I just writing about it." So.
Yeah, definitely. You kind of alluded to it, and me and John were talking about it earlier, but how do you deal with those people that are overly critical and everything? Because I do know that a lot of times people will tell you all the reasons that you can't do things and all the reasons that you shouldn't be doing things. And you kind of alluded to that, Christopher, and earlier me and John were talking about the inner critic and how it can be a voice that can oftentimes one that we probably don't need to listen to, because it sometimes can destroy our opportunities. So how do you deal with, Christopher, both that inner voice as well as those people that were the negative nannies? Because you will have negative nannies in whatever you're doing that'll tell you all the reasons that you can't do what you do.
Oh, you do. You have so many faith quenchers that say it's impossible. And then, one of the things is I look at, again, like I mentioned, Disney and all the things that he went through and he overcame. And then look at all the things in my life where I've overcome. But I do take in, like, try to, you listen in a very Spock-like way with like no emotion to the negative criticism. And you see, is there anything that they're actually saying that you can glean? And then some people are just negative for the sake of being negative. And I was looking at it today and talking to another author and saying, look at the positive, because they got negative reviews in their book, and the person that read it obviously wasn't a fan of the genre at all. And so they attacked, like, oh, why would you, do this in a sci-fi? And sci-fi books are stupid. And the person was like, but what happens is that negative criticism really rallies that author's fan base to get protective. And sometimes they come back and they'll write, no, that's all part of the genre. That's something different. And there are some people where sometimes you just have to ignore. Personally, as an author, I end up putting them in my book afterwards, which I have done. And some of the criticism is just, it can be ridiculous. Like I have one character whose name is Replacement, and that's her nickname. Her name's Alice, and she got the nickname when she was young as Replacement because her brother was going off to war, and he said, "You have to watch the house while I'm gone. You're my replacement," and it made her belong. And this woman went on, a one-page diatribe in a review on Amazon that was the stupidest nickname she has ever heard in her life. And then she signed it sincerely, Bun. And I just laughed. Where I'm like, sometimes people think I'm like a hot dog bun, really? And so somebody, you just laugh it off. But I do have a thing: you never feed the trolls. You never. I write back to everyone and try to find something, but there are some people that you don't know what they're going through in life. So
this is a question for you, Christopher, that I kind of asked, but I've never asked it. I can remember an author, but how much do you like the labeling? Because I know some authors that are very much adamant that they are only science fiction or that they're only writing this or that. But I know a number of authors that are able to write in a variety of styles and that are able to go from genre to genre. And I would say that from what I've read and heard about you, that would be you as well. Because I think some of your books are definitely more science fiction based, but there are probably some others that are more kind of personal development and all along those lines. But how much does it bother you if you are trying to stuck in one box?
I can't be in a box. I write in everything. I mean, even my Jack Stratton series, which is my kind of a traditional mystery series, I went and I did like a murder, a cold case, a kidnapping, and I varied it up that way. But I also write cozy mysteries, and I write the psychological thrillers. I have a post-apocalyptic series that I just did. I just finished up a trilogy series with Yakuza Hitmen, a female assassin that I just love. And in some ways it helps to get away from the writing block. So I'll write one-off books. I have a whole Western trilogy planned out. That's kind of like the Princess Bride meets the Pirates of the Caribbean meets a Western that I'm really excited about. And a romance that's called Popcorn and Manicotti. So that way where people say, they get, writer's block and they get pigeonholed, I'm like, try different things. I mean, that's one of the things that you can, that can keep you really fresh, keep things interesting, and you can see what you like, what you don't like, and you might be very surprised at the things you like.
Yeah, this is for both of you, and in a minute I'm going to play I Can't Stop My Heart, which is one of John's songs and everything. But how important is experience in both of your careers? Because I do know some people that only want to write about what they have personally experienced, but I know others that are able to write and even to do music on things that have not been directly related to their lives. Because I know some people that have written some great romantic ballads because they went through their romance, and then I know others that have written it based on the experience of friends and the experiences of acquaintances. But how much is experience necessary for both of you in your creative journey? Or are you able to step out and maybe use the experiences of others?
Well, I'll jump in here. Experience brings with it a lot of honesty, and honesty communicates to people. So whether it's real experience or whether your creative imagination is that good, as long as it comes off as, oh, I get that. So I think in the end, when you write about your life's trials and tribulations, it's easier to go into the zone, but it's not a must, because if I get a movie score right now and I've never written bluegrass and I don't play bluegrass, I can still take that music score, do my research, and involve myself fully. And I may have to do more research than is normal, but in the end, I know that I can write a really good bluegrass music score, and to the point where somebody will come after, talk to me and say, "Hey, well, John, I didn't really know that you were such an expert in bluegrass." And I would say, "Well, I'm not, but I actually studied it and grokked it." Remember that word in Stranger in a Strange Land? Grok. That was one of my favorite words. Grok means to understand, and understand it and apply it. So I think God gave us an imagination, which is great because it doesn't have any rules. It doesn't have any walls. With your imagination, you literally can do anything, but don't underestimate experience and applying that experience.
What about yourself, Christopher?
Oh, I completely agree. And again, coming from a theater background, sometimes with walking through it, you can directly translate it. But there are things like I remember I did this play where I played a Vietnam veteran, and a method director came in and he said, "Oh, you need to find a similar experience and go and experience it." I'm like, finding a similar experience to Vietnam and experiencing it. That's a brilliant idea. And of course, everybody was like, "Chris." Um, so, but you can really come close. Like I write a lot of police procedurals. So we have this wonderful program down here called the Citizens Academy, where you can go into the sheriff's department. They take you on tours of the jail. You go on ride-alongs with the police officers. I have numerous friends in law enforcement that I go and I speak with. And in any of the books I do that research, and really just connecting with people. Like there's so many people that have that story. So for me, it really helps that I'm an extrovert and I'm very inquisitive. So when I speak to people, like I frequently, people love telling the stories. Like sometimes I speak before thinking and I say, "Well, you're wearing that, ankle monitor, from because you were convicted. Can you take a shower in that? Or do you have to bathe and like stick it out of the tub?" And you can get down to some of the nitty gritties and get a lot of flavor of what happened to people. And so the listening, it's so important to listen and then convey that and try to walk in their shoes. And I think that's one of the lessons that my mom taught me. And, and it's a biblical lesson is, walk a mile in somebody's shoes, try to find out, what they're going through and then convey it to others.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. Go ahead.
And with your imagination that we're God given, you can assume a viewpoint that you've never experienced, which is pretty incredible ability. The ability to assume somebody else's viewpoint. In fact, one of the most successful things in any business, marketing, or even creativeness is, I can write a song completely for myself and get my rocks off and hope that a decent amount of people get it. But I also could assume the viewpoint of the listener that I want to communicate to and get my rocks off and win in both ways. So sometimes I do feel esoteric in a certain niche, and I do understand that I'm in that area before I get into it. So I'm purposely not trying to communicate to everybody and be commercial. There's nothing wrong with that, but I do realize business-wise what I'm into and what the marketing situation is going to be. That particular creation may have a different form of marketing necessary. So the assuming of the viewpoint of the listener or the audience many times is natural as I'm writing. But if I wrote and it wasn't natural and now I'm done with the product and I got to sell it, then I have to be able to assume that viewpoint.
And that's really important. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that is very important in being able to, as you said, like wear those different hats. And like there are people that say, "I want to make wagon wheels." And it's like, okay, great. Knock yourself out making wagon wheels. Just know you're not going to sell too many wagon wheels. And I don't think it's, taking the cheap road, either. When I asked my wife, I said, what sells? And she's like, a female-centric psychological thriller. And I said, great. Okay, I'll write that. And because artists need to eat too. So
yeah, definitely artists need to eat. I was actually going to ask about that in a minute. One of the questions I ask all my guests, and this is for both of you. But before I get to that, one of the things that I had asked earlier before you gave on, Christopher, but I'd love to hear your stories around this, because John gave some of his earlier. But what failures led to your success, and how did you learn from those failures? Because John mentioned a failure being signed at a very young age, and all along those lines, and then people getting drafted during the Vietnam era, which kind of disrupted what was a success. But what was a failure that you learned from, and all in that space?
I'm going to bow out for a second to go to the restroom. Be right back. Is that okay?
All right, no problem.
Okay.
Oh, I have failed spectacularly at different times in my life. I think one of the things was I started a video company where I was making different videos. There were a lot of church videos that I was making, and I branched off into commercials and different products there. And I actually it was at a business fault of my own about I had a deal fall through and had to declare bankruptcy. And that really guided me later on being even more cognizant of where I'm spending my money, how the money's going, what I'm doing for marketing, and inspired me to work hard. Like even I launched a book. It came out yesterday, and this morning it was on the #1 mystery. And I'm back up at 4:30 and I'm writing. And because, as they say, today I'm a peacock. Tomorrow I could be a feather duster. So I don't want to be the feather duster. So I keep working and work hard. My grandfather was a World War I vet, and just such a wonderful man and such a hard worker. And he was born in a different generation, born in 1898. And I remember, his stories and how hard he worked. And so I do believe there's a lot of that success is what you make.
Yeah, that makes sense. What advice would you give to folks? Because I have some friends that are working on those auto books, and I do know that you are recognized as one of the top 100 Kindle authors of all times, and your books have sold over 3.5 million ebooks, print and audio books. So what advice would you give to folks that are looking into that market and thinking about breaking into the e-market and all along those lines? So what advice would you give to folks? Because you definitely have got some tremendous accolades, Christopher, in that space. So what advice? Because a lot of people are thinking, hey, I got a book idea. I don't know if I want to write the old-fashioned way, but I'll do an audio book. And I even have a friend that's got an audio book that's kind of in that space of fantasy and all along those lines, kind of those, what do you call them, where the society is very much in a disturbed kind of state.
Oh, like a dystopian.
Thank you. A dystopia. That's the word I was looking for.
And that's great. The biggest thing is there was a old children's cartoon, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, where they say put one foot in front of, I can't sing, the other. And it's to get started and to do it and to take advantage of all the wonderful resources that are out there. But you really need to be determined that it's something that you want to do. And if you are determined, there's so many resources out there for writers, and really the gatekeepers are no more. There's nothing holding you back. I am independently published completely by choice. But I started doing the independently published where I went to go, should I go to the traditional publishers? But right now I have like a real Johnny Cash attitude where nobody tells me what I can write, what I can't write, the things I can put in my books. Like I write clean books. I mean, they can be very gritty. But when I went to the publishers wanted me to swear, and where some approached me, and I just said, no, that's not what I do. And that felt great. It really having that freedom, but it's so possible. And there are so many people that I've personally helped get their book out there. My daughter just wrote a children's book, and she just nailed it. And I was so proud of her. And that the proudest thing is she listened and kept at it. She's working a number of different jobs, but she kept her eye on the prize, and she made an outline and did it. And if anybody wants to go to my website, I can point them to different resources that they can get. And now you really can. Like, I published my first book for under $100, and it was a really good book, but I had to hustle as far as getting editors and proofreaders. There's so many things that it takes longer if you don't have money, but it's still doable in the publishing realm. You still can do it. If you can break out the money hose, of course, it's faster. It doesn't mean it's going to be easier, because I heard John talking earlier about wearing the many hats, and I commend him, because now that he came up through the market, he knows the different jobs. So, and I was the same way, where I did everything myself, and I still do. I still tweak covers, but I hire cover designers. But now I know what to do, and I also know what to look for. So when I'm talking to somebody and they're trying to sell me a bill of goods saying, well, it's going to take this and that, I'm like, no, I actually know how to do that, because I used to roll up my sleeves and do it.
Right.
Yeah, in that same space and everything, you kind of alluded to it, Christopher, but one of the things I hear my fellow creatives talking about is this notion of the work-life balance, and trying to make sure that you are given enough time for your space. And I am a big believer that we are physical beings, emotional beings, spiritual beings, and mental beings. So we have to make sure that we're giving time to all of those aspects of our personality, no matter what your belief system is, and all along those lines. But how do you do that work-life balance, and how do you do that as a creative? Because one thing that I know many creatives do, because I've got a couple of fellow creative friends, and some of them will be out there driving Uber or driving Lyft because they can't make enough money as of yet on their creative space. And some of these are not exactly spring chickens. I got one friend that is in his early 60s and is still driving one of those services in order to make some money while pursuing reinventing his musical career, because he already had it when he was in New York, and he's reinvented it now. And now he's probably reinvented it for the third or fourth time. But how do you do that balancing thing when there's those bills got to be paid?
See, it's nice, because I was coming from the same thing, because I only started writing again 10 years ago. And I was working 3 jobs at the time, and I had 2 kids and a very awesome wife. And the first thing that I found out is, one, and again, I'll start it from the rooftops. I put Jesus first. And so if something comes into my life that I have to do, like if my kids need something, if my wife needs something, I have many roles that come before creative. But I found that if I put them first, then all of a sudden, boom, I've got this idea that comes out. And I don't know whether it's like when God held the sun in place, for like a battle. It's like a miraculous thing. But or like all of a sudden a chapter will come really easy and the paybacks, fantastic. But if I put aside some time too, like I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and I would go into the bathroom, because we had a 2-bedroom apartment, and I would go into the bathroom to write. That's all I could. That's the only place I had, and I actually loved it. I wrote some of my best work in the bathroom. So my wife's like, "Don't tell that story." But you carve that time out. But it's so important not to to do that middle of the road thing too, because one, you're important, and you need to be your own best friend, and you need to take care of yourself. Like, how like in an airplane accident, the masks drop down and they say, put the mask on yourself first, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to help your kid or your wife or, whoever is sitting next to you. So you do need to take care of yourself first. But it's amazing that if you keep at it and keep focused, it'll go. Usually you'll be able to build it, even if it's one block at a time, one thing. It's like, I should see it. I'm addicted to these note cards. I have note cards everywhere, and that's how I outline. And I tell people when they want to start a story, I say, you know what? Grab 3 note cards, write beginning, middle, and end, and stick them on the wall. There, you got 3 chapters in your book. 3.
Yeah.
And they're like, I do. And I'm like, just start with a step, the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. Or as John said, I give you all the kudos. He goes, they want me to do bluegrass. Okay, I'll research it. The internet's a wonderful thing. Like, I had to write about some parts in Russia, and I couldn't believe how many satellite Google images that you can go in. I was looking at Russian police stations on the internet, going down the street so I could describe the street. And I'm like, I thought all this stuff, I grew up in the whole age of, Rocky and, America versus Russia. I'm like, I thought this was all blacked out.
But apparently it's not in everything. Hey, John, how do you deal with that whole work-life crisis and everything? That work-life balance?
Well, initially, I bought into, which I think is wrong, this whole, when inspiration hits me, then I got to do it. And if it doesn't hit me, then it doesn't. I'm not going to be productive. Meaning I was sort of an effect of something that I didn't understand. Then I realized once I got my craft together, because there's such a thing as integrity and creativity, but as I'm sure Christopher will agree, he has a craft about writing. He knows how to write. Anybody can come up with an idea for a story, but not many people can develop it and finish it, and that takes a little bit of craft. If you look at a Beethoven score, my God, he's got things crossed out, and there was no editing, and this and that. Okay, and he created the Ninth Symphony. His score is horrible. On the other hand, Mozart was considered almost channeling everything, and you look at his score, and there's no marks on it, and apparently he just was able to create and flow it out and get it done. Now, in the end, who cares? Are you going to say that the Ninth Symphony is not that great because it's been edited and crafted forever and ever? Are you kidding me? The Ninth Symphony blows your mind no matter what. You don't think about it. At the same time, you can listen to Mozart. So what I glean from that is, when the creation hits me, and it's almost, in my opinion, being channeled from above, I'm very humble and I will take advantage of that. Hey, honey, I got something going on. Can't go to the beach today, but let's make it up and do this and be in communication. She understands. But when I got a deadline that I've either imposed on myself or the publisher or the recording studio, then I actually, and I don't like to use the word force, it seems bad, but I force myself to compose or to write. And I'll say, all right, tomorrow I'm getting up at 9, I'm going to have breakfast with the family, and I'm going to write from 10 to 3. Don't bother Poppy during this time because I got to get into it. And I get into it for those 3 or 4 hours, but I know that dinner's coming and I'm going to be back with the family. So I organize my life. If you study the Vedic hymns and certain things, they talk about everything is a cycle of action. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So if you're going to write, then you got a cycle of action. Start. I'm going to start. I'm going to continue, meaning I'm going to keep writing, and then I'm going to end it. So you're being causative on all 3 of those cycles of action, rather than, when the Lord just strikes my fancy, I'm going to write. I guess I didn't write anything for 3 days, and the publisher goes, hey, how's it going? What am I going to do? Give them that, excuse? No. So I decide it's almost like that concept. If you're not happy, force yourself to smile, and soon you'll be happy, because a being can create his own emotions. He doesn't have to wait for this happiness to just magically come into his life or wait for this impulse. He can actually be a little disciplined and force himself to get into something. Next thing you know, he doesn't even realize it. He's back there's no more writer's block, because he didn't agree with writer's block. He just decided to get into it anyway and start writing, and the pump has been primed. So that's how I approach it.
That makes a lot of sense. Everything. Just really quickly, because I know another thing that we talk about on this network and everything, I'd love to hear both of your answers to this, is there is three very powerful words, but sometimes we don't like to use the word, even though it has to be used by both of those that we are approaching as well as ourselves. So how do you get past using the words no and yes? Because those are two powerful words, and a lot of people are afraid of those words, even though they're a part of the creative background and part of what goes on in the creative world. But I know that sometimes people are afraid to say no because they're afraid of the consequences of no, and even though it might not be that great of a consequence. And I know authors and musicians oftentimes face no as well. So how do you deal with that very powerful word? It's only two letters, but I do know that sometimes people are afraid to say no and let themselves get talked into things that they probably don't need to be talked into.
Go ahead, Christopher.
Oh, you're going to give me the easy one. I actually have no problem with no. And I didn't. I had to work at it. And a plug for another book. I read a book called Boundaries, which was absolutely fantastic, and realized, I didn't have the boundaries that I needed. And so I forget the author of it, but it's so important, and it helps people sometimes when you say no. Because when you say no, you're saying no, you do it. No, not yet. I can do that later. And explaining it, and again, being the own best friend. I put off a lot of things where for later on in the day, like say, John, you mentioned it. I try to organize my day according to my creativity. So at the beginning in the morning, I can write, and I can write hot, and it'll slowly go down during the day. So then I shift to other things like marketing and email responses and more the business end that I can shift to. So there's a lot of times where I say not yet. So it's not a firm no, but it's a not yet. But no is actually very freeing, and take it in. Again, listening is so important. But I'll listen to something, and then I'll weigh it, because time is the most precious thing we have, and you're limited on time. And it really, I think, is helpful if we're try to be like smart good shepherds. Like for the longest time, I was the dumb good shepherd, where if you're all familiar with the story where the good shepherd, he comes, and the good Samaritan comes, he finds the guy beaten up. I bring him to the hotel, and the good Samaritan, he had business in the city. See, before I would be dumb and I would stay with the guy at the hotel. I would pay for everything in my cart that I was supposed to sell at the city, say it was fruit, it would all rot. I'd lose my business, and the guy kind of wouldn't care. And instead, he says, you know what? I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do, and that's it. And then I got to go, and I got to take care of my business. So you set those boundaries, and that's super important. So.
Yeah. Hey, John, same question for you, but along those same lines of boundaries, I'm glad you brought up boundaries. I do know that sometimes there are dream stealers out there, but there are also people that want you to live their dreams and everything, because that's something I face, where people want you to kind of live their dreams, and it might fit within your context of your own dreams, but sometimes you got to tell people that's your dream, that's your ambition, and I can't support you if I have the wherewithal to support you. But it kind of comes down to that notion of how many masters can you honor and all in that space. But how do you deal with those boundaries? Because I do know that those boundaries is something that I've even dealt with, where people want you to kind of like live their vision, but then you have to tell them that's not necessarily your vision.
Well, I have 2-word answer to the no thing, and that's called personal integrity. Mm-hmm. Integrity means being whole. Mm-hmm. Personal integrity means being whole and honest and true to yourself. Right. And about the worst problem one can get into in their lives is not being true to themselves, because then in the end, they're not true to anybody. Mm-hmm. No comes in a variety of forms. It could be my manager saying, hey, the record company would like us to do blah and blah and add a vocalist to this and blah, blah, blah. I'm in sole communication with me. I don't mean in a narcissistic way, but the moment something enters my space, I pretty much know that that is not for me now or ever or whatever. But I've learned how to say no in a polite way because I used to be an Italian, not be so polite. And then I burned bridges and wondered what the hell has happened. So I kind of take the approach, hey, John, it would be so great if you went. I remember Stevie Wonder wanted me to go on tour a long time ago. We had become good friends. And I was just about ready to start a movie. Now, part of me was like, God, I've known Stevie for a long time. It's the first time he asked me to go on tour. I should do this. I should is not the same as personal integrity. Wow, I want to do this. So my integrity kicked in. Hey, Stevie, thanks so much. But because of blah and this movie coming up, man, I so appreciate that you asked me. I'm really humbled. I just can't do this right now. That was different than just no. So there's ways of saying no that I think we have to get some adroitness with, because if it's something that's insulting and not good, then I have a different type of no. No, are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind? Don't ever ask me to do that again. And even that is said with what's the word? A little bit of glue, but it's no doubt said that they know better than to do that, and I can't believe they didn't know better. So personal integrity, I think, is everything. Without personal integrity, you don't make right decisions in life in every aspect. Now, how do you develop personal integrity? A lot of it's a school of hard knocks and learning what you like and don't like, and finally becoming one with yourself in that area. And that takes a little bit of work with some people.
Yeah, no doubt about that. You mentioned Stevie, you mentioned Donna Summers and Chick Corea. And I think that Christopher's also worked with some folks that had some fame and fortune as well. But what are some of the lessons you learned from some of those folks that might have surprised you or maybe didn't surprise you? Because I know that one of the things that I know of, even though I don't know him personally and didn't know him personally when he was living and everything, but I have friends that worked with Prince, and they talk about Prince's kind of drive in the way that he worked and the kind of way that he was I won't say a perfectionist, but he was definitely a person that was not going to put up with a lot of BS in the studio and wanted his music mates to be similar and everything. So I just wondered, what are some of the lessons that you learned from some of the greats like Chick Corea and Stevie Wonder?
Well, most of those guys, I don't know whether they were born with it or what, definitely had personal integrity. They knew their power. They knew what they wanted. And sometimes they get misunderstood because they don't have time. Like Christopher said, time is an important commodity. They don't need to explain everything, especially if it's creative that they're involved in. And so sometimes they can come off a little short, or come off, like people will say, oh, he's a perfectionist and he's a real what to work with. When in fact, I remember somebody telling me something about Stevie Wonder, and I was there when this particular incident happened, and his version of it has nothing like what Stevie did. Nothing. Means he just reacted to Stevie's certainty and Stevie's talent. So these people are extremely blessed with talent. They know what they want, and I'm like honored to be in their presence and learn. They used to say, like, Beethoven, the teachers in Vienna school used to teach their hottest, recruit their hottest students to go be apprentices working with Beethoven. And Beethoven was a type that would just throw a shoe at you if you didn't do what he wanted or you didn't understand him. But the whole idea was, you have to understand, this is Beethoven. He may have some flaws, but he's got some abilities that you should just shut up and pay attention. So to answer your question, I've learned that being around these monster people, I had to temper myself and realize, this guy, who he is for a reason. I think I'm going to pay attention, and I'm going to ignore things that might rub me a little bit wrong, because these guys got some incredible talent and they know how to use that talent, and I'm honored to be in their space. Now, have I run into complete a-holes? Believe me, I have. And I ran into a couple that I never wanted to work with again. And in my mind, I just said, this is not really that good of a human being. But I will give him credit. He really has this ability down, and that's the best I could do with it, you know?
Yeah. Along those same lines, Christopher, I know that you've definitely worked with some folks that had some notoriety, but you've also worked with some first responders. And I know that the first responders got a lot of attention during the pandemic and everything. So what are some of the lessons that you learned from that work with those first responders and just some of the people that you have worked with in general as well?
Well, I used to work at a television station too, and I'd interview a number of different people. And I remember the people that really stuck out are the humble people. And now that I've moved to Tennessee, one of them is, Dolly Parton, and just the realness of it and treating everyone the same. It's something that I grew up in doing, and how much that touches people and affects people. And but again, as John said, trying to put yourself in other people's shoes and be respectful of them, because can you imagine it from a flip side, how many people say would approach Taylor Swift in a way and they would treat her a certain way just because she's Taylor Swift, and how many people that we meet like on TV. Like I remember meeting some people on TV. Like I had a funny one with Don from Lost in Space, Mark Goddard. I was in a play with him, and Steve McQueen taught him how to ride a motorcycle, and I would pick his brain for all of these stories going back. And there are so many people that are in the industry, and you can glean just how to be a better person from the ones after talking to them for me only a few minutes, that you see some of the lessons. Like I know the Bob Hope's one of his tour managers. He's in his 90s now, and just a wonderful guy. And I'd ask him questions about Bob and what was Bob like. And as John said, that there are a number of people that get puffed up on themselves. And those people I tend to nod politely and not talk to too much, because you don't want to be around them. But the real ones that you cherish, those are the ones that I try to learn from and go, I'd like to be more like them and more treating everyone with respect.
That makes sense. Hey, Christopher, I know that one of the other things that you're big on is that you are not just an author and an actor and definitely a storyteller. You tell some of the stories even today and everything, but you are also a martial arts instructor. And I do know that tends to be a way that people come into tune with themselves. And a lot of times people will say that martial arts isn't necessarily about destruction and mayhem, but it's actually a mindset and everything that can help you in the overall life. So which form of martial arts do you practice, and what is your thoughts around the importance of martial arts just in creating that overall well-being of your own inner peace?
I also have I have a background in that too, so that's coincidental. We'll have to talk later, Christopher.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, it's actually my brother owned a martial arts studio. He stopped it recently because of a heart attack that he suffered, and he's doing fantastic right now. But he started teaching me right when I was battling addiction, so over 30 years ago. And that was one of the things that was instrumental in helping me through my battle of addiction. And he came at it from a very scientific approach. Brilliant man. And I absolutely love martial arts. I think it's in some ways like chess in human form. Everything from the fighting to the weapons, the forms, everything about it. And again, before martial arts, I grew up in kind of a rough and tumble thing, and I used to fight all the time. And afterwards, like we had a really funny story when I was working with computers in Boston. There were 5 gentlemen I worked with. And we all had our black belts. We would go into Chinatown, and when there was a Chinatown, for lunch all the time. And I remember I came in once, and I saw this one of the guys, we got split up and we came in two groups, and this one of these guys was so mad. And I said, "Oh," I said, "I know what happened. You were walking down the street and a very angry man with a blue backpack slammed into you." He's like, "You saw him?" And I said, "I did. I didn't see it happen to you, but I saw him." I said, "But I used karate on him." And he's like, "What did you do?" I said, "I crossed the street. I saw him coming from a mile off, and he looked really angry." You know, I go, "You walk with a chip on your shoulders because you have a black belt with your chest puffed out, and you're like looking for a fight. And there are other people in this world that want to fight." So just that mindset too of martial arts was just so fascinating, and it really opened up a whole different world as far as, you know, for me. Like, I used to watch Jackie Chan movies before anybody knew who Jackie Chan was, and Toshiro Mifune, and so much as far as the art, as far as like Kurosawa. You know, if you want to watch like great movies and you watch the original Seven Samurai, and that whole atmosphere, and how many things help. I could go on and on about martial arts.
No, martial arts is fascinating, like I said, and I definitely want to hear John's connection to martial arts as well. I never studied. I do have friends that have studied different forms of martial arts. As a matter of fact, my boss over at the Cultural Arts Center that I'm part of, the Haiti Heritage Center, she has been part of, and I think she created the Krav Maga. I think that's the form of martial arts studio and everything. So she's very much in that space. And I know some people that are into Kung Fu and karate, but even in the small rural town that I grew up in, there wasn't that much events, the space and everything. I think there was a disco. As a matter of fact, I know there was a disco called Starlight. There were a couple of pool halls, and we had a small movie theater. So this would have been in the mid-'70s and everything. And what was shown in that small movie theater in rural North Carolina was a combination of old Westerns and old martial arts movies. So that's kind of what you were going to get. Didn't matter whether they were popular or not, because these were, like, when I say old, they might have been from the 60s, even though we were in the 70s. But that's what was being shown at the movie studio, because, like I said, it was a little small movie studio in our small downtown area. But John, what is your own connection to martial arts?
Well, when I grew up, I became a fan of Bruce Lee's because I just thought, I've never seen anybody that certain, and his speed, just, even though everything I saw him in was acting, I eventually found out that he's the real deal. But when I moved out to California, I started studying some Kempo from a local guy, Hawaiian Kempo, just to get into martial arts. Then one day I found out that Bruce Lee's partner, Danny Inosanto, who's a master Filipino Eskrima martial arts, was his partner in life, and they hooked up together. And Danny had a martial arts school that Bruce and him used to train at. I went, "Oh my God, that's 30 miles down the street." And I was like sort of a complete dada goo fan to be anywhere near something that Bruce Lee even walked into. So at about 35, 36 years old, I drove down. I went in there and I saw a class being done, and I saw Danny Inosanto beating on a drum and teaching a class. And I'm going, "Oh my God, that's the guy." I'm in Bruce. It was like church, right? Make a long story short, afterwards, I joined the class, but I had the courage and the balls, a little bit stupidity, that ended up working out for me. I went up to Danny afterwards and I said, "I've been a fan of Bruce's my whole life. I just moved out here. I'm a jazz musician, but I've always loved it. And I'm so glad that you have this. I'm going to sign up and start studying." And he goes, "Yeah, what level are you very experienced?" I said, "I'm pretty much more of a beginner." And he told me what class to sign up with that he taught. So I did, and I did it for about 3 months. Was just humbled as much. Then one day I had the courage. I walked up to Danny because I had money. And I walked up to Danny and I said, "Would I be out of line to ask you if you would teach me privately? I have the money to study with you, but I know it's not all about money. As you have seen in the class, I'm no expert. I'm okay." And he very politely said no, like we were just discussed. He says, "Sound me later." So another 2 months went by. I sounded him later, and he said, "I'll think about it." And in my head, I went, "Oh my God," he said, "he think about it." Wow. So 2 months later, I went up to him on a Saturday after class and I said, hey, you think you told me to sound you later? And he goes, yeah, you got time Saturday at 10:30? Oh my God, I almost levitated, you know. So I showed up Saturday, and the quick story is he comes up to me and he says, just like in Enter the Dragon, when Bruce had, do you remember the scene where it was time for him to have the lesson with the guy in Enter the Dragon? He goes, sorry, it's what's his name's time. And he walks up to his student and he said, kick me. And the student looked at him funny and he said, kick me, kick me. So the student kicks him and it wasn't a very good kick. And he goes, what was that? Kick me with intention. So it was a similar scene that I wasn't ready for. So Danny walks up to me and he goes, punch me. And he's standing right in front of me. Danny Osanto's telling you to punch him. And it reminded me of the scene. So I wound up to give him, that, and he stops me with a little parry. He goes, what are you doing? He goes, I can see it coming from a mile away. First lesson, never telegraph what you're going to do. Yeah. And I said, well, my hand was here. Now I'm, pushing back and I shouldn't have. My hand was here. You said, punch me. And I wanted to get some power. He goes, you ever hear the 1-inch punch that Bruce talks about? And I said, yeah. He goes, go get those focus gloves. And I got 4 focus gloves. And he told me to stand in a horse and put them on my chest and stand. And he got his hand and he put his hand 1 inch away from those focus gloves. He goes, you ready? I said, yeah. And he goes, bam! I go flying across the room and literally got bruised ribs out of that. And that was my first lesson with Danny and Osanto, learning about how not to telegraph a punch. So I studied with him, not too long, but a few lessons, and I was honored about that.
You should definitely be honored for that, and definitely telegraphing punches, telegraphing anything is a bad habit that a lot of folks get into, and all along those lines. We only got a few more minutes. I definitely still want to play your video, but before I get to your video, and the question that I ask everybody all along those lines is definitely, Christopher, one thing you mentioned, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, because Dolly Parton had some ties to North Carolina as well, that he tried to even build a center, like a musical center that I think now is being used for like some of gambling centers, and I don't think that it is being used as much as what it was originally created for and everything. But what is a lesson that you learned from that icon of country music and everything in that space? Because she is seen as a businesswoman and not just a woman of certain assets and everything. But what is a part of her conversation that you learned from that icon of country music?
Well, I don't know her personally, and so, but my nephew just relayed a story, and I have to say it, and it's what I think that we all need to keep in mind about other people. He actually takes care of some handicapped people. He's a caregiver, and he brought one to a Dolly Parton concert, and he went up and he said to one of her assistants, is there any way you could have her sign just something? And Dolly Parton said, the assistant went away and came back and said, you come backstage, bring it here. And she came over and she took the time, and it meant so much to that fan. And really that's it, where, John, you were talking about, connecting with people, and really that's what you really want to do. You want to connect. If you connect with that, that one person, if you're looking at it, and then it grows, that, that spark, and you treat that one, person right. And two, you don't know what it's going to do down the road. You don't know how it's going to change their lives. But I've had people, write me, and they just absolutely bring me to tears. Like, for example, a friend of mine, and such a wonderful guy, and he went through so much heartache, and he ended up committing suicide. And in the books, I use that, and when people reach out and they talk about their grief, and I try to convey that and take the time, and that's why I try to answer all the the emails I get personally, because you don't know what somebody is going through. And I personally suffer from depression, and I have to fight it myself. And so there are that golden rule of do unto others. And like I said, today a peacock, tomorrow you might be a feather duster, and you don't know if it's, going to turn around. And, tomorrow, I'll be the one that's looking for somebody to give me that smile. So
Yeah.
I try to smile at everybody.
Smiling is always a good thing. John, if you could set up a little bit of what I Can't Stop My Heart is all about, and both of you can think about, because the question I ask everybody, and I'll ask it after we hear this song and everything, is definitely the network is an international network. So I give everybody that comes to this dinner party, whether it's the two of you or whether it's groups of 4 or groups of 5 or however many come at the various shows and everything, an opportunity to give a message of positivity and hope, and also a way that they can be contacted. So that's what we'll do as we wrap up after hearing this particular song. And I may also, after you give your message, close out with the B3 Soul as well. But definitely you want to set up I Can't Stop My Heart and everything. And then I'll hear y'all's 2 answers after that.
Sure, my pleasure. This song, as I told you earlier, my wife passed away once I moved from LA to Nashville. I live outside of Nashville in Franklin now. Hey, I heard you. So you said you live in Tennessee. Where do you live?
Cookville.
Okay.
So we're close. Franklin was one of the places I looked at.
Yeah, I love it here. We'll get together. We'll hook up. So my wife heard this song that my manager is a double platinum songwriter, producer, and manages me. And his record label wanted me, the jazz musician, to cover some of his hit tunes, do an instrumental version. And we listened to about 10 tunes, and my wife, bless her soul, loved this song. It's called I Can't Stop My Heart from Loving You. That it had vocal, but I was going to do an instrumental. So the theme of this song is very special to me because it was her favorite song. So I tried to put my heart and soul into this instrumental melody, and I really had a good time. So that's what it's called. And it ended up being top 5 on Billboard Jazz charts. So there you go.
Cool. Well, let's check out I Can't Stop My Heart. And then, like I said, I'll hear y'all's answer to the closing question as well. And then we'll probably close out with B3 Soul. But let's hear I Can't Stop My Heart. What a great song, powerful song. And like I said, there was some good music and all on those lines. I definitely appreciate your music and all in that space. Like I said, get ready to wrap up the show. But as I was saying before, and then we'll play B3 Soul. I definitely want to hear from your thoughts as that. So I'll probably go to you last, John, so that you can set that up as well. It'll be one of our last things along with
Sure.
a couple of PSAs and everything. But Christopher, if you want to tell folks how you can be reached, anything that you hadn't get to about your books and everything, and any message of positivity that you would like to share as well. Because like I said, it is a global network. Pod TV is one of my personal goals is to try to use my platforms to spread whatever kind of positivity I can and all along those lines. So if you got a message of positivity and hope, I'm always glad to hear that from my various guests.
Well, I'll start with that first. And the positivity is, in the message is that I'd like to say is for people to get plugged into a church. I know it's not the most popular thing, today, but God really is active and looking for you. And if you get connected, there and get connected with people, this world wants to just divide us, separate us off, and have us be alone. And it's just so wrong. And I know that a lot of people had bad experiences in churches, but I had bad experiences at the doctor. And if I'm sick, I go to the doctor. So if you go to a church and you have a bad experience, go to a different church. Just don't start going, because you're worth it. This life can be like when you were a little kid, when you woke up and morning smiled and you wanted to run out and find the adventure that's out there. It's still that same world. We just get jaded and pressed down, and it doesn't have to be that way. There's so much hope in this world. And if you want to talk, if you can't, reach out to me. You can find me at Christopher Grayson, GREYSON.com or GraysonMedia.com. I got some free books for you. If you have any questions, feel free to talk to me. A lot of different books that you can pick from, and shoot me a message. Again, I respond to each one of them personally. I want to thank you very much, Mark. And I have to say, I love your voice. Absolutely love it. So being on the show is a delight. It was great meeting you, John. I hope we do talk later with you being so close. I love the song. So thank you both.
Thank you.
No problem. Before I get to John and everything, that's interesting you said that because, like I said, I definitely believe that no matter what your convictions are, that definitely having a spiritual anchor is good. Because I do have friends of different religious groups, not just Christians, but also Muslims and Buddhists and a number of others as well. Actually, was on because I get around by mass transit on the bus yesterday, and all along those lines, there was a gentleman, an older gentleman, that was talking about some of the things he remembered as a kid that kind of alluded to what you were just saying, because he was saying how he remembered collecting butterflies and putting them in the glass bottles to make like those little firefly lamps, and how he remembered flying kites and playing marbles and even being in the baseball field. And I'm sure that both of you, as people that grew up and had ties to the Italian community, can relate and everything, that if you were really good, they would let you stay in the infield. If you were really bad, like I was, you were going to go out to the outfield because not many people were going to hit out in that direction. There was only a few people that would be able to hit out there. So you spent a lot of time collecting the butterflies and whatever else junk was out there, because there was only a few people that were going to manage to get the ball hit in your general direction in the first place. But he was saying that a lot of our kids, unfortunately, don't, and I don't have any kids, but I do have two nephews, don't have that experience of being out as much as he would like them to be, this particular gentleman that I was talking to. So I think that he may have a point in everything in that space. But John, if you want to tell folks how you can be reached and all along those lines, if you want to tell folks any other message of positivity that you would like to share as well. And like I said, I love the title of your book, that whole Inner Architect and everything is a great title. I think more people need to be getting that book. But if you want to tell folks how they can get a copy of that as well.
Well, I too like your voice. I'm going to go a little further. One of my favorite comedians in sitcoms of all times was Sanford and Son. And so you got a Red Fox vibe, brother. Yeah, I feel like I'm talking to Red Fox. Remember the scene whenever he ran into problems, he'd be thinking about it's his time to go, and his wife was in heaven, Elizabeth. And he'd go, Elizabeth, I'm coming. Elizabeth, I'm coming. And I still, it's been 2 years since the Lord took my wife, and every time I run into that, I'm telling you, I'll be walking around the house and I'll say, Barb, I'm coming. I think I may be coming. Get our castle ready. So hearing your voice is very, I don't know, it's warm. So, yeah, when I got the sort of command from the Father to write this book, it was sort of an order. Uh, my vision has become now, even though I've accomplished a lot as a jazz musician, I still do music here and there. My new vision now is to significantly transform the quality of a person's life to the God frequency, as I call it, the perfect frequency. God is love. The word is love, God frequency. And so all my mentoring is geared to take the fundamentals in my book, The Invisible Architect, How to Design Your Perfect Life from Within, because we're children and we all are one. And Jesus said, it's the Father that does the works, not me. And that's how I think. And even when I write a song or write a book or mentor somebody one on one, I don't really feel like it's me doing the work. And that's the success and the power behind me because of that. So people want to get a hold of me. One of my goals is to help people live and create higher frequency lives because humanity has lost its way. And if you remember a book called The Celestine Prophecy, that's all of the author talks about how humanity has lost its connection with source, with the Father, and therefore has become weak and vulnerable to all the stuff that's going on. So what I like doing is hooking up with people, helping them create a higher frequency life, because the more people that I can do that with, the more humanity will get better and better. So if they would like to talk to me about that, hook up with me in any way, shape, or form, my main website is johnnovelloauthor.com, johnnovelloauthor.com. And if they go to the services page, they can click and fill out an application, send me a text, send me a message, and I will be glad to talk with them about anything. Okay?
Sounds great. If you want to, just really quickly, because like I said, I'll close out with a couple of PSAs. But before the PSAs, I'm going to play B3 Soul. So if you want to let folks know about that as well.
B3 Soul, B3 is a famous instrument that's been on a lot of records, a Hammond organ, B3, the model. And I got famous playing that. So I wrote a song called B3 Soul, which is all about that particular sound. And it went to be number one. So this is B3 Soul.
Sounds good. So we'll play that and we'll play the PSAs and we'll get on out of here. But it's been great talking to both of you. And I look forward to having you on future editions of the Online Dinner Party and other shows on Pod TV as well. But
thank you so much for having me.
Really thank you again.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maria Jones, baker and owner of Very Vegan, a premier mobile bakery specializing in putting a plant-based spin on some of your favorite desserts. Inspired by my own personal experience with my journey with healthier eating habits, I was determined to make comparable items with desirable textures and great taste. We're always experimenting with different flavor profiles and expanding our menu. I enjoy my creative license as well as imparting ideas and requests from my customers. It makes for new and exciting items. Some of our customer faves are the specialty cheesecakes such as the banana pudding with homemade vegan vanilla wafers, strawberry crunch, honey bun, fruity pebbles, peach cobbler, and many others. We also offer moist, rich cupcakes, delectable cookies, decadent brownies, and scrumptious pound cake. Discover how amazingly delicious vegan can be. I am available for orders, or you can purchase my items exclusively